Tips on how to use GitHub Copilot Agent Mode in Visual Studio 2026. This is a tutorial or more of some of the lessons that I've learned when using Copilot. Once you have Visual Studio 2026 connected to a GitHub account and you are logged in with this GitHub account, then you are ready to get started. By default, there's a free GitHub account with only limited features. If you are doing very heavy coding, you are going to need at least the GitHub Pro subscription. I have a separate video on how to get started if you're completely starting from scratch. Now, the first super simple basic concept to understand, there are two modes in Copilot, namely the chat and agent mode. Agent mode goes beyond just basic chat in that it can actually do physical actions in Visual Studio, such as creating files, editing them, creating new solutions, creating projects, doing builds, running tests. So pretty much every action that a human developer would be normally manually completing can be automatically done by in agent mode. In most cases, the Copilot agent is going to sort of allow the user or the developer to have some control by giving them permissions. So it is going to ask for confirmation before completing any irreversible actions. In practice, if you have the Pro subscription, you are going to be working in agent mode pretty much all of the time. I mean, that's going to be the whole point of having a GitHub account, to allow this AI to manually, automatically do a lot of the work. Now, coming to source control, before doing anything with GitHub Copilot in agent mode, don't forget about the good old source control. AI coding assistants can generate a whole lot of code, and most of it can be incorrect, where you're going to have to come in a little bit later and do a whole lot of bug fixing. A developer must be super vigilant and alert when making large-scale changes. And by source control, I mean just going beyond the actual source code. It's also going to mean the database. And if you can just picture this big enterprise where you have got multiple team members, if you just make changes to a database, even outside of the topic of AI, usually it's very painful to recover if you lose the data or anything goes wrong with the database, especially if there's multiple people making changes to it. So just work out a source control strategy, anticipating that GitHub Copilot is going to simply just churn out large volumes of code. And then the strategy might also have to think about if you want to have a clean history or some kind of, when you look into your Git history, you want to have it a little bit more linear or a little bit more clean. So you might want to think about how you're going to handle that sort of scenario. Moving on to the workspace. The workspace is one very important concept when using GitHub Copilot in agent mode. And this actually took me a while to sort of get my head around. So the workspace is basically just a sandboxed area that the current running instance of Copilot has full access. And only within this sandbox area, Copilot can do anything useful. And I mean, this is a very, very obvious concept, but I just kept on making this very silly mistake of opening a Visual Studio, and I wasn't able to understand and figure out why I can't make changes to a folder outside of the workspace. So just to stress my point, and let's say you're doing a code rewrite and you want to keep the original solution, you want Copilot to create the rewritten solution in a different folder. So for this to be able to work under the sandbox restrictions, both folders, so both the new solution and the old solution, are going to have to be under the same parent sandbox folder. Visual Studio Copilot has to be initiated from this parent folder that is both the new and old folder as sort of the children. So effectively, as I said, as a sandbox, however you started running Copilot, however you initiated Copilot, it must be able to see anything almost below it, below the folders below. Another issue is that sometimes Copilot does not see some of the subfolders, even if they're under the workspace. So every now and then you must confirm you must prompt Copilot to ask it what workspace it's working under. The slight issue I had with workspace in Copilot, it doesn't directly inform you if the workspace is out of bounds. So it's gonna give you a whole lot of errors that are not related to the workspace, and this might send you on a lot of tangents with a lot of red flags. You might sort of lose a lot of time without understanding what exactly the root problem is. So if you are unsure, you can always just confirm with a prompt with Copilot what the current workspace is and if it can access what you are trying to achieve. Moving on to the execution plan. When you prompt Copilot to take a number of actions, it's going to show the execution plan, which is basically just a list of steps it's going to take to complete the prompt. You might want to instruct Copilot to always wait for you to actually confirm before doing anything, before actually taking any action or executing the plan. Sometimes what you prompt Copilot might not be exactly how it interprets or understands the request. So it's just a good idea to just go through the plan, read it, and then always prompt it to confirm before doing any action or before getting started. Moving on to the different types of models. There's quite a number of them in Copilot, and almost like every week there's a new model being added. Now, which model should you be using for your coding task? For example, let's say you are doing C#.NET backend development, and the honest answer is that for most coding tasks, all the models are technically good enough. They're all sufficient. The main difference is going to be speed and flow of productivity. And this is actually quite a crucial difference. So, if one was just to take maybe a step back, the whole point of using AI coding assistants is to have quite a huge productivity gain. But I was just surprised as to how slow the free models are. In most cases, if the task does not need the agent mode, basically if the task doesn't involve building the solution or creating new artifacts, even the most common web-based chat models are much quicker. For example, if you just need a single class to be created, the web-based DeepSeek is usually much faster than the free models in Visual Studio. So my tip would be to avoid the free models as much as you possibly can. Another tier of models is the premium tier. And if you're starting out, make sure that you understand how the cost structure works. It's not that difficult to understand. So effectively you pay for a subscription and you get allocated a set number of what Copilot calls premium requests. So not all prompts or requests have the same cost or weight. More complex requests would cost more premium requests. Now, besides just the different prompts requiring or costing different requests, there's also a relative scale or cost depending on which model you're actually using. So one premium request on a model such as ChatGPT 5 Mini, which is effectively free, is going to consume close to 0 premium monthly allocated units. But when using a premium model such as Claude Sonnet 4.5, this might consume, as an example, 1 unit just for the same prompt or just for doing the same work. Obviously, when using when you use another model like Claude Haiku 4.5, this might cost only a third of the premium request. So you might be doing exactly the same work or the same request or the same task, but depending on the different model, the premium request or the cost is not going to be the same. Just keep this relative pricing in mind, which I would suspect is based on the speed of delivery, which might be one point to consider, and then also on how advanced the model is. Some models are general purpose, while others are specifically for software development. What I normally do is I constantly check how much of a request I've been using. If I've given the model a prompt that's going to consume a lot of requests, I just go into the GitHub website on the dashboard and check how much of the premium requests I still have left over for the month. In most cases, the latest cutting edge models are just going to be overkill for just the normal coding churning tasks. A model like Claude Sonnet 4.5 might be overkill, where Claude Haiku 4.5, which costs roughly a third, would do the job at relatively the same speed and more or less the same quality. So Claude Haiku 4.5, it is a premium model. It is significantly better than ChatGPT 5 Mini or any of the free models. At this stage, Claude Haiku 4.5 is my default best model. I only use the more advanced models when this Haiku 4.5 gets stuck. The best use case for the free models is if you're willing to wait. So I think because you have a large project and you might want to save up those premium requests for later on during the month. Also, when you are doing some sort of spec-driven development, if you're going about this the old manual, old school way, so you have actual documents written in Word, Excel, and you have some handwritten diagrams. Now, parsing, or for any AI to read and parse this human documents, that's going to be very expensive. A good idea would be to use the general purpose free models to build an execution plan, and then once you've got that plan, the code implementation, just carrying out the code execution, can be done using the premium models. Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is the speed and just the general flow of work. As I said before, if you can, just avoid the free models. But now some agent tasks, they just take too long, irrespective if you're using the premium model, the free model, whatever it is that you're doing, these tasks just happen to take way too long. For example, if you want a new solution and projects to be created by Copilot, so you don't want to be doing this manually by clicking in Visual Studio. This is a very simple task, but for AI Copilot, in almost all the cases, usually takes too long. Now, a practical scenario would be if you're doing a big solution rewrite and you have a spec with a list of new projects that need to be created on the new solution. Also, you've got a list of NuGet packages that will need to be installed. This can take longer ironically, when you're using AI. If you were to do this by hand, you might actually come close to matching Copilot, GitHub Copilot in the speed. So, like I said, some tasks, it's actually much more efficient if you use PowerShell scripts instead of just using GitHub Copilot. The scripts are super fast if you were to compare them with Copilot, which can take a couple of hours. And I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying some of the tasks are going to take a couple of hours. So a good strategy is when you realize a set of non-human tasks are taking too long, such as creating a project, or if you're installing NuGet packages, it's much better off if you ask Copilot to create the PowerShell scripts to carry out the execution plan. And Copilot is going to create these scripts quite quickly. And then again, when you actually run those PowerShell scripts, that's also going to go a lot quicker. So now, still on creating projects for a large solution. When a large solution needs to be arranged with solution folders, and there are some subfolders within the solution, and then you've got a very specific way in which you've arranged the project. And these projects obviously would have references to some other projects, and they are organized in some sort of order or hierarchy. I always found Copilot to struggle when you prompt it to automatically create a given, just a given solution structure. I then end up having to manually move the project to the correct solution folders. Some projects would need to have the references manually added. Okay, and now just yet another example of how things can get very difficult for Copilot. And then in this case, I was actually surprised that all the models are just too slow. This is where there's a template of a code structure, but you're just doing the same thing repeatedly. So you're just churning out this donkey work. A good example is always going to be a data layer, where you might have some best practices for handling data access. For example, you've got 10 database tables. Each one of those tables need a repository. You need to set up a lot of boilerplate code. If you are following some of your strict coding best practices for your team, this might be creating an entity. You might want to have separate DTO objects, and you're not directly using this entity in your user interface or your web projects. Also, you might want to be setting up the entity framework configurations per entity, and you might want to set up a DR container. So this is quite a lot of little steps, whereas for each entity or each database table, all of these steps are going to be the same, and you're just repeatedly doing this. It's just maybe work that should be automatable very, very easily. And so the ideal case, any AI model, it should be smart enough that if you were to show it an example of how you implement your best practices, so if you were to show it a different project where you've already done this sort of thing, it should be able to just look at that project and then quickly scaffold these repetitive tasks. In one practical scenario, I had 70 entities from my old code, which is badly written, and I wanted those entities to now follow a more modern best practice. Effectively, Copilot would be following a template. The data project, however, in real life, when I asked Copilot to complete this work, this took over 3 hours. It is still much quicker if I was to do this by hand, but I just feel that this sort of thing should have taken maybe 15 to 30 minutes. I suspect in most cases that the AI models are not yet smart enough to realize they're doing repetitive work. So they might be trying to reason on every little single entity. That's why maybe they're taking a little bit too long. Okay, so now moving on to just some common sense. When using GitHub Copilot, it's a tip that everybody sort of seems to repeat, that you always have to remember that you're using a coding assistant. So GitHub Copilot it's not this super intelligent machine yet. You are going to need a bit of a big mental shift from how you view AI as this very fast and very efficient robot. If you have a task that's a simple once off, and you can do that task by hand, so it's most cases you're just much better off just doing that task by hand manually without having to prompt and chat with AI, which is going to take too long, and then the AI itself might not complete the task. And another little common sense tip is, there's really no shame in constantly interrupting Copilot if you feel that it's taking too long. The problem is that sometimes it gets too stuck and then it doesn't indicate or doesn't feed back that it's not progressing with the execution plan. And for me, typically, if it starts taking about 3 minutes or longer, I simply just interrupt Copilot and ask it if the task is progressing. Okay, so these are some of the tips that I have when using GitHub Copilot in agent mode. Thank you for watching.